So yeah, good morning. My name's Gareth. I'm an energy consultant. So I work with apartment buildings all about managing and reducing energy usage. And a big part of that is looking at solar. And is solar right for your site? And if so, what are the steps we need to know about when we look at solar? How do we work out if it's going to be cost effective? How do we get quotes and go through that process? So today I'll be speaking for about 45 minutes, and we'll leave some time for questions too. We'll run through hopefully all the things you need to know about solar for your apartment building. And we can have some questions going as I talk, or we can have questions at the end. So if anything pops up you want to ask me about, feel free to put that in the chat as well. So we are all here today because we are interested in solar for our apartment building. But before we jump straight into the solar, we have to have a bit of a think about what is the best use for our roof. So the roof of an apartment building is a shared facility. It's a common shared facility. For some buildings, putting solar on the roof may be a good option. For other sites, you may find you're limited. You may need to use your roof to install plant equipment. Here's an example of a client down in St Kilda who had a really large flat roof area. They decided to use that for this outdoor dining area. And this site was a brick walk-up, was already very energy efficient. The apartment's already energy efficient. So for this building, it was their preference to actually use their roof space for something else as opposed to solar. So we do need to be considerate that this is a shared common area facility, and is solar the best use for our apartment building? If we do have a flat roof, do we want to use it to hang out washing and avoid using dryers in our building and avoid that energy usage and that humidity? So lots of different uses, but assuming yes, we've agreed we do want to use our roof for solar, before we do solar, we first need to think about energy efficiency. So we never jump straight into solar for a site. I love solar. Everyone here today is really interested in solar, and being able to produce our own electricity and use that on site is a fantastic thing. But first, we really want to get our apartment building and our apartments as energy efficient as possible. So when we're looking at the common areas of an apartment building, there can be a whole range of equipment. And here's some pictures of that equipment here. We can have centralized air conditioning pumps. We can have cold water booster pumps. We can have pool equipment. We can have ventilation fans, for example, exhaust fans for kitchens and bathrooms, car parks and fire stairs with lighting. And if we have a building or facility, before we start adding to that facility, first we want to optimize and manage what we have. All this equipment here is critical to the functioning of a building. This is equipment which at some point needs to be maintained, needs to have money spent on it. And we want to first invest in this existing equipment before we start adding on the solar and everything else. And that's true for common areas, and it's also true for apartments too. We want to make sure our apartments are as energy efficient as possible before we then go onto solar. So it's a really important first step. And here is a bit of a figure showing a case study from one of our clients, and they did exactly what we're talking about. This is the electricity usage of their common areas. This is a site in Zetland with 129 apartments, and they didn't jump straight to solar. The first thing they did is looked at their car park ventilation and got really big savings. The second thing they did is did a site-wide LED lighting upgrade and got really, really big savings. And last but not least, this purple line at the bottom, they installed a 25 kilowatt solar system and got even further savings. So we don't jump straight to solar. First, we minimize and reduce our energy usage of our common areas or our apartments as much as possible. Once that's as low as it can be, and we've already implemented all those cost-effective opportunities, then we do solar. And the payback on solar, it could be quite attractive at say 4 or 5 years, or it could be higher at say 6 or 7 years. So there's lots of other opportunities which may have a payback on investment of around about 4 or 5 years that maybe you want to look at that first before we do solar. But I don't want to put you off solar too much. I'm just trying to be a little bit aware that we do want to address other issues first. And if we've already made our common areas energy efficient, if we know our apartments are already energy efficient and we're using our energy wisely, and yes, we want to go ahead with solar, yes, we want to use our shared facility roof for solar, well, the thing we need to know is our site ready for solar? So apartment buildings and living in an apartment, as we know, is very different to having your own freestanding house. It's a very different type of beast, and there's all these additional things that can come up, these extra complexities, which can affect whether solar is going to be viable or cost effective for your site. This is going to sound a little bit negative, but we just need to be aware of what these issues are so that when we do move ahead with solar, we're already aware of these types of issues. We're aware of what we need to look for in our site. So when we go ahead, we're well informed. So we've worked with lots of clients over the past couple of years looking to get solar, helping them get solar quotes through to the final installation. And over that, we've identified 3 main issues affecting apartment buildings looking at solar. The first is the roof condition. The second is to do with your electrical infrastructure, so your wires and meters. And last is about working on the roof and roof access. And we're going to spend a bit of time talking about all of these because these are things we really want to think about when we're looking at our own apartment buildings. And we want to have a really good understanding of all these different issues so that when we go out to the stage of getting a quote, we already have a good idea of what we need to ask these solar installers when we get the quote. So in terms of roof condition, is our roof leaking? Is it leaking at the moment in the rain? Has it been leaking in the past couple of years? Are there any current issues or any historical issues with your roof leaking? If so, these are things we may need to address before putting on solar. Maybe you can check our capital works program and find out, well, when was our roof or our roof membrane last maintained? Has it ever been maintained or upgraded? Is our building 5 years old or 30 years old? Has anyone ever gone up and looked at our roof? When is it due for an upgrade? We need to be aware of these things because solar is a long-term investment. Solar panels, they'll be up there generating electricity for 25 years. But our roof may not have such a longer life, and we need to be aware of that. For some sites, if your roof is in a really bad condition, this has happened with quite a few clients, they've decided we can't put on solar right now. We need to fix our roof, replace our roof first or our roof membrane, and then look at solar in a few years. And this is an example of a site down in Melbourne where they were super keen for solar. We can see the satellite image. They had an old roof and it was very rusted and they were having issues and they just could not put on solar until they had this resolved. Solar suppliers, they do or should offer a 5-year warranty on their workmanship. And solar suppliers are very cautious of working on a roof where there's issues. A solar installer does not want to install solar panels 4 years down the track. We call them up and say, hey, our roof's leaking. It's something to do with your installation, and for them to have to come back and fix it. So some solar suppliers, they may look at your roof and say, hey, we're not comfortable to work on this. Or you as a site may say, we're aware there's a few issues with our site. We don't want to put solar at the moment. Or we're aware of the few issues and we've identified that, but we still want to move ahead with solar. And look, no roof is perfect. My house roof isn't perfect. No one's going to look at your roof and say, you know what, we guarantee your roof will have no issues for 20, 30 years. There's always a few little niggling issues. That doesn't mean we don't do solar. It just means it's something we're aware of now. And if it's a major issue, it's something we address before or during the solar installation. So roof condition is a really big issue that we need to be aware of. If we want to install solar, we have to have some idea of what is our roof condition. Now, if we have a flat roof, there's a few options for how we can put the solar panels and keep them up there on our roof. So the standard traditional way is an anchored membrane piercing system. So if we have a flat concrete roof on our building, there'll be a waterproof membrane to stop any water ingress through that concrete roof. When we need to install solar panels, they need to bolt it into the roof and pierce through this waterproof membrane. Whenever we talk about piercing through a waterproof membrane, a lot of people get a little bit nervous because it feels like that could be a potential fault in the system or where we could get a leak. Look, if we need to do membrane piercing, it's not that big an issue as long as your membrane's in good condition. There's standard practices for how to do this, for how to pierce through a membrane and seal it up. And this is something that's done every single day. And when you have people on the roof installing a new fan or doing other work, they're always doing this sort of thing. So don't be scared of an anchored or membrane piercing mounting system. However, there's also an option for a floating or ballasted system. And that's where we don't actually pierce through the waterproof membrane and bolt into the roof. We use bricks to weight down these solar panels. And we've got an example of that here to the right. So it's an engineered solution. It looks simple, but it is engineered to ensure that these solar panels will survive and last on that roof with different wind conditions. With this ballasted system, there is quite a lot of weight to this system. And it's something to be aware of. We've worked with clients where they've looked at the capacity of the roof and realize, well, we can't handle this additional weight of this ballasted system. They have to go to membrane piercing. So there are two options for a flat roof, membrane piercing or ballasted. Both have their relative advantages and disadvantages. Electrical infrastructure is something else we need to be aware of. When we've worked with clients who've gone out to get a solar quote, solar installers are quite happy to say, here's a cost to install solar panels onto your roof, but they often don't go into the detail of, well, how do we connect these solar panels to your electricity supply, whether it's for your apartment or for your common areas. And that's often a point where some projects can run into some issues. So does our main switchboard look like this on the left, orange and new and shiny? Does it look like this on the right, which is quite old and haphazard and maybe needs a little bit of upgrade and work before we can install solar? If we have solar on a roof, do we need to run cables down the outside of the building? Is there a riser through the building we can run the cables through? Is there a distribution board near the roof that we can connect up to? So we need to have a little bit of an idea. We don't need to be experts on this, but when we talk to solar installers, we want to say, hey, we're interested in solar. We're aware our building's 40, 50 years old. The wiring maybe isn't quite as good as some buildings, and we want to make sure that they address that and give us and address that in their quotes. Another thing with electrical infrastructure we need to be aware of is you need to replace your electricity meter when you install solar. So you need to have a smart meter which is capable of measuring import and export electricity. Now, if we're in a house, that's really straightforward. In apartment buildings, it's not quite the case. The replacement of your electricity meter, the responsibility of that is your energy retailer. It's no longer the energy network operator, Ausgrid, it is your energy retailer. So if you have a house and you're with Origin Energy, you need to get solar, you contact Origin Energy and they'll organize someone to come out and change your electricity meter. Pretty straightforward. If you're in an apartment building, if we're installing solar for our common areas, we'll need someone to come and replace that common area meter. Depending on how your meter board is set up, they may need to shut down other meters or have a temporary supply interruption in order to do that. Now, for Origin to do that to the meter they're in charge of, there may be other meters at your site with different energy retailers. Some may be with AGL or Energy Australia or Red Energy, so forth. So replacing your meter to a smart meter can be very straightforward and can be quite complex. And that applies to whether you're looking at doing it for the common area meter or for your residential meter too. So something we need to be aware of. And if we're looking at solar for an apartment building, one of the first steps we want to do is contact our energy retailer and say, we're looking at getting solar. We need to replace our meter to a smart meter for this. We understand it's your responsibility. We need to get someone to come out, look at our switchboard to see, are there any issues that we need to be aware of, or is this quite straightforward? So it's really important we look into this straight away. We don't want to spend all this time looking at solar, getting quotes, getting excited, about to install it, and then find out the very last step that we have to manage this massive upgrade of the meters and the switchboards. And we also need to have a bit of a think about our building. Can we get onto this roof? Can we work safely on the roof? How do we get solar panels onto the roof? The first picture on the left is a client who installed a large solar system. It's a nice big flat roof. It's not a high building, but there's one area I had to walk along which was a little bit narrow, and they had to install a safety handrail before they could safely work on the roof. It wasn't a big issue. They did it, but it was an extra cost. The site in the middle is a site who's super keen for solar, but their roof is very high up. It's on a high slope, high angle. We talked with a few different solar suppliers. No one was able to work on that roof safely. So solar was just not possible for this roof, just due to safety concerns. The last photo on the right is a site where you can get to the roof really easy, but we go through this manhole cover. And that's something we see with a lot of sites. And this manhole cover is a certain size, and you can't physically get the solar panel through this manhole cover to get it onto the roof. So for this site, they would need to get a crane onto the street, organize that to carry the solar panels onto the roof. It doesn't mean solar is not impossible. It just means we need to be a little bit aware of how are we going to get solar panels onto the roof. Can we use a top story apartment, go through their balcony onto the roof? Do we need to get a crane? Things like that. So these are all the things we need to be a little bit aware of. So when we go and get quotes, we already have a good understanding of what's happening at our site. So let's say we've already had a bit of a think about these issues and we think, yes, solar is good for our site. There's three different types of installations we can look at when we're in an apartment building. The first one is when we're just looking at solar for our common areas. The classic example here is a high-rise building where our common areas actually have quite a high energy usage, and we have a relatively small roof area. So the roof isn't big enough to put on solar for the entire building, but it is big enough to put on solar to supply our common areas. The second example is where we install solar for common areas and apartments. Now the classic example is this sort of big, widespread, low-rise apartment complex where we've got lots of common area equipment, common area electricity usage is still quite high and we should have solar for it. We have plenty of roof space and we can also put on solar to supply other apartments as well. Or the third example is when we're just looking at solar for apartments. And the example here is a brick walk-up. Now there is a common area electricity meter, but common area electricity usage is really low. There's only a couple of lights running in the stairwell. And it's just not worthwhile putting on solar to supply the common areas. But there's this big roof area and we can install solar to supply the different apartments. So these are the three different configurations depending on what type of site you have. And it's worthwhile mentioning Illume here at the moment. So Illume is a great Australian company who has a solution to install solar on an apartment building to supply common areas and apartments. So if we're in, say, case 2 or case 3, instead of installing individual solar systems connected to each individual apartment or electricity meter, they can install one large solar system and have an intelligent system to distribute and equally share that solar to the different common areas and to the different apartments. I think this is an amazing idea and it's been shown to work in a few really good studies. And if people want to go into that, then there's a contact. I could put you in contact with a company or Illume themselves after today, potentially. So yes, whether Illume is right for your apartment building, with any type of technology, there's certain applications where it's really designed for that and certain applications where it's not so designed for that. It's probably worth noting that if you want to install solar for all your individual apartments, you want to have probably at least 2 or 3 kilowatts of solar per apartment. So if your roof isn't big enough to install a 2 or 3 kilowatt size system per apartment, then it may not be big enough for that type of solution. Or it may be an option that maybe only some apartments can install solar. And that gets a little bit tricky for your site to manage, whether we need to say our roof needs to be big enough to accommodate panels for everyone, or whether the roof is only big enough to say accommodate solar for half the apartments and half get to opt in, half get to opt out. That gets a little bit more complex. Something for you to think about, but look, we'll move on. There's no other real solution apart from Illume at the moment, just reading through that question now. So at the moment, it's either installing individual solar to individual apartments or going to Illume. There is something called an embedded network, and that is when you replace all your electricity meters at your site with one electricity meter, one connection to the grid, and put in sub-meters throughout your site. And your entire site will get one electricity bill, and then that will be shared off amongst the other apartments. This is something that happens in commercial shopping centers and commercial buildings. It's something that has happened in apartment buildings to some degree, but it often hasn't happened that well. There's lots of okay examples and bad examples of that. So there is an option for an embedded network, but it's not something we're going to talk about too much today. We're talking more about putting in solar for your common areas and apartments or looking at the Illume solution. Now here's an example of a client. This is a building not too far away in Waverley. This is a site that is 8 stories. There are 48 apartments, one common area electricity meter. They're spending about $11,000 a year on electricity. Now this site has already gone through steps to make themselves energy efficient, have already upgraded to LED lights. So now they're at a stage of looking into solar. So what are the steps that we go through as a consultant and we want our clients to go through when looking at solar? So first we want to assess the roof capacity. How much can our roof generate? Next, we want to go, okay, what's our daytime electricity usage? You know, how much are we using and how big a solar should we get? What's the kilowatt size we should get for our site? We want to get a bit of a rough cost benefit analysis to work out, well, is solar going to be cost effective for us? We want to identify other potential issues. These are the things we talked about before, like the roof condition. We want to go out and get some quotes. We need to be able to analyze those. We need to seek and we need to get a final quote, develop a business case to take the executive committee and get their approval. I'm just seeing a question pop up here. What about if only one owner wants to install solar? Is that possible if switchboard is to be upgraded? Roof access possible at owner's corporation to allow roof space to be used for that purpose? Yes, so the roof is a shared facility and you can pass a special resolution to say this shared facility can be used by this person to install solar. So if only one person wants to install solar, it doesn't mean you can't do it at all. It's just obviously something that has to be agreed on by the apartment building. If you want to upgrade your electricity meter, whether it's for solar or for something else, yes, you can do that. It's just that it may be more complex for some buildings or for some apartments than for others. So you always have a right to say, well, I want a smart meter. Just say you have the old dial meter and you want a smart meter for whatever reason. Yes, you do have an opportunity to do that. But just be aware it can be a bit more complicated than it is if you're in a house. So going back to our case study, the first thing we want to look at is what is our roof capacity? How much can we generate on our roof? So a solar array requires around about 8 square meters per kilowatt. This particular site had a really big roof area of 600 square meters. However, only a fraction of that is usable to install solar. There's a lift motor room up there, there's ventilation shafts, there's access points, there's a bit of shading. So when we take that into account, we find out, well, we can probably accommodate probably a 30 or 40 kilowatt solar system. So this building could have quite a large system. And the next slide is, this tool is called Sunspot, and this is something I use, and everyone's homework after today is go into this website and look at the roof of your building and work out, what is the generating capacity of our roof. This is a really good tool developed in Australia. You can go to a map and you can zoom in into your apartment building, type in your address, you can highlight your roof and it's going to tell you what is the generating capacity, how many solar panels can you have up there. You can enter more information and get some really good analysis about solar for your site. So it's really, really useful to go onto this website, the link is there, type in your address and look at your roof and do some calculations. And we use that to try to work out how big a kilowatt system can our roof accommodate. Now, what size should we install? Just say we know our roof can fit a 30 or kilowatt solar system. It doesn't mean we install a 30 or 40 kilowatt solar system. We would install the right size system for our building. And it's not so much about how big our roof is, that's more about, well, how much electricity do we use during the day? Here I'm talking about the example of a common area meter, but the same thing applies when we're looking at our apartments as well. So we don't care how much electricity we use over a year or every month or over a day. What we really care about is how much electricity we use during the day, particularly the middle of the day when our solar panels will be generating the electricity. As a rough guide, we normally say a solar system should be around about 1.5 to 2 times your daytime kilowatt demand for electricity. So just say your common areas during the day use about 10 kilowatts. They would normally say maybe a 15 or 20 kilowatt solar system should be fine to meet that. We always go a little bit bigger, and that is because something we often don't know is that the maximum output of a solar array is never what it's rated to be. So if you install a 10 kilowatt solar system, you're never going to get 10 kilowatts from it. The most you may ever get from it during peak summer periods is maybe 7 or 8 kilowatts. Of course, there's all these different inefficiencies. So installing 10 kilowatts of solar panels will never give you 10 kilowatts. That's why if you want to meet, say, 10 kilowatts of demand that you're using for electricity, you need to go a bit bigger and go to, say, 15 or 20 kilowatts. So that's a really rough ballpark figure to think about what size solar system we should need. But how do we know what our daytime electricity usage is? We cannot get it from billing data. Here we have a little screen grab from a bill, and our bill will show us how much electricity we use over the course of a month. So our peak, shoulder, off peak. We don't care how much we use per month. What we care about is how much we use during the middle of the day. And for that, we need to look at something called interval data. Interval data is our electricity usage recorded in 30-minute intervals. And if you have a digital or smart meter, it's something we can get access to. A lot of common areas will have that. If not, we can also do some data logging as well. If you do have a smart digital meter, you can really easily access this interval data by contacting your energy retailer. Sometimes you can log in into your account online and you can download a CSV file and look at that as well. It gets a little bit more complex when we start doing some spreadsheet analysis, but it's something we should be aware of, or it's something maybe we should download and send off to our solar installer when they do the quote, so they have a good idea of what we're using. And a lot of solar installers will ask for this data as well. For the particular site that we're talking about in our case study, this is the interval data in this figure here. And we can see that during the day, they use around 6 kilowatts. So if they're using about 6 kilowatts of electricity during the day, that's how much they need from solar, then around about, say, a 10 or 12 kilowatt system would be the right size for them potentially. I'm just looking at the questions here. So a question from Winnie: my apartment has disc meters for everyone, including common areas. If we use the Illume solution, does everyone need to replace their meters, and do everyone need to negotiate with their retailer for solar rates and meter replacement? So in terms of the Illume solution where you need to replace all the individual meters, that's a good question. They have a bit of a back-end solution where they will analyze and share the electricity and the costs equally amongst the apartments. If we do need to replace all the individual meters, then yes, that does need to be organized from each apartment with their own individual retailer. So just say you're an apartment building with 5 apartments, all those 5 apartments may all be with a different energy retailer. Each apartment will need to organize with their own individual retailer to upgrade these electricity meters. If the way your switchboard is set up, if you all have your meter there and you have your individual fuse, then it's relatively straightforward to switch off your apartment and replace your meter. However, with some buildings, we may find there may be one fuse for several meters. So you may not be able to change your meter without turning off other apartments. And that's when it gets more complex as well. And I just see a question here about batteries. We're going to get to batteries a little bit later in the talk today. So when we size a solar system, we need to know how much electricity we use during the day. For that, we get our interval data. Here's some examples of some interval data from different common areas, and it's worthwhile noting that some buildings will use more during the night and less during the day. Some buildings will use more during the day and less overnight. Some will have these spikes in the demand. Some will have these big ventilation fans for car parks running morning and evening. So until we get the data and we look at this, we really don't have much of an idea of how much you're using during the day just from a bill alone. And here's some data for individual apartments, and we all are interested in solar for our apartments as well. Something to be aware of, that our apartments can use a lot of electricity during the day, or they can use a very small amount of electricity during the day. And we have some examples from different apartments here, and we can see for some buildings, they only use, say, about 100 watts during the day. So if your apartment is using only 100 watts, then if installing a 2,000 or 3,000 watt solar system may not be right for you. Maybe your usage is already so low that solar isn't right. And maybe your usage peaks in the mornings and evenings when solar isn't generating. So maybe solar is right for your apartment, maybe it isn't. And there's nothing wrong with installing solar, but we want to be aware of whether or what the real savings and the real cost benefits will be. So it's something to be aware of with our apartment. And again, if we have smart or digital meters for our apartment, we can get this data for our apartment as well and look at that. Something we need to know about is something called the export ratio. So when our solar panels generate electricity, sometimes we're using more electricity than they can generate, and we're sucking all the electrons in and using it all at the one time. Sometimes the solar panels may be generating a lot of electricity, but we're not using very much, and that excess goes back to the grid. Now, the export ratio is a percentage of electricity going back to the grid compared to how much those solar panels generate. So if you're using everything your solar panels generate, your export ratio is 0. You're using everything from those panels. We normally say an export ratio of around about 10% is okay. So it's fine if a little bit of electricity goes back to the grid here and there, but we don't want to over-invest and over-capitalize in a system where lots and lots of electricity is going back to the grid, because that just means we've gone a little bit too big. Some people will tell you, solar installers will love to tell people to install a bigger solar system. Once we're there and we've got our laborers and we're doing this work, you may as well go, instead of an 8 kilowatt system, let's go a 10 kilowatt system or 12 kilowatt system. And to some degree, that's okay. There's no harm in going a little bit bigger, because the cost of the panels is not that much more once you've got all this extra work going on. But it's only up to a certain limit. And we need to be aware that solar installers and suppliers, their job is to sell solar panels, and it's in their interest to install the biggest solar system that they can. And they'll tell you, look, install a bigger system, doesn't matter if someone goes back to the grid, you can get this really high feed-in tariff. And we don't need to believe that. Yes, the feed-in tariff, it's not horrible at the moment, it's okay. And we can see the feed-in tariff from some retailers. If we go to some government comparison websites and look at the rates, it can be as high as 21 cents per kilowatt hour. So that sounds really good. But you know, if AGL Energy Australia is offering this really high feed-in tariff, we know that they may be increasing prices somewhere else, and it may not be the most cost-effective solution. And here's an example of a client who installed a large 24.6 kilowatt solar system. We did some analysis, and 18% of the electricity was being exported back to the grid, which is a bit higher than what we want to see. So our feeling is that this site over-invested, over-capitalized in this large solar system, and you know, pretty much 20% is going off to the grid. Now, we did some analysis on what the best rate would be for them, the best contracted retail rates. And AGL has this residential solar savers plan with this really high 21 cent per kilowatt hour feed-in tariff. That may sound amazing, but their rate for the electricity during the day was a lot higher. Just their general plan, which had a much lower solar feed-in tariff, only 10 cents, had much lower rates from electricity purchased from the grid. And the cost saving ended up being $1,500 a year. So don't let energy retailers sort of pull the wool over our eyes by promising this high feed-in tariff. And if a solar installer says, hey, install a much bigger solar system, you get this high feed-in tariff, don't believe it. We want the right solar system for our site. If I go into a clothes shop, if I'm a size extra large, I can get an extra large for the same price. I don't get that. I get the shirt that's right for me. If you're installing a pump for your pool, you're not going to install a pump that's twice as big. You're going to get a pump that's right for your building. I love solar. Everyone here is interested in solar, but the key is not to install solar. It's about making our buildings energy efficient, reducing greenhouse emissions in the most cost-effective, sensible, and sustainable way. And often, overcapitalizing and investing in a really large solar system is not the best long-term sustainable solution. It's about installing the right size solar system for our building. That's something I believe a lot about. I'm a bit of a rant about that. Here we see some questions here. So I'm just going to answer a few of the questions here. So we'll get to batteries later. One question here, our unit block has a pitched roof. Should we only consider the north facing parts, or can we also consider east and west facing? So there's nothing wrong with east and west facing roof. There's this online tool we talked about before called Sunspot, which is free to use. You can zoom in on your roof and you can highlight the different areas, and it's actually going to do some calculations to show you this is the generating capacity of the north section, and this is the generating capacity of the east and west, and the south as well. And you can do some analysis to see what the difference is. And east and west facing panels, they're not quite as good as north, but they're definitely worthwhile. And if your roof pitches to the south, you can also have some mountings which will lift the solar panels up to face them to say 20 degrees to the north as well. So I'd say it's definitely worth considering east and west facing as well. The next question, do we recommend the first step towards solar is to install a smart meter to gain the data needed? Only an occupier interested in solar in a block of 12. Look, it's not a bad option. I personally love data and looking at the data. That's what I do. So I'm a bit biased. If we do have a smart meter, it means we have a really good understanding of what we use. If you don't want to go through the process of upgrading your meter, you can get some relatively simple plug-in solutions to work out what your electricity usage is over the day. So you can put some clamps around your cables, and you can do some measurements, and you can record what your apartment uses over the course of a day, over a week, something like that, and get a rough idea. So we can get some data to understand how your apartment uses electricity without going to the steps of replacing your meter. So I'd probably say before replacing the meter, maybe get these power monitors, which maybe cost about $100, $200, and actually measure what you're using over the course of a week. And someone else has made some comments that the feed-in tariff is down to 7.5 cents at Power Shop. Yeah, so it varies a lot in the market. You'll see a big change, a big variance in what that solar feed-in tariff. And it's not so much as when we look at reducing our costs, it's not about getting the best feed-in tariff. It's about looking at all the different rates. So fixed daily supply charge, the cost of electricity from the grid, and what they'll pay you for electricity going to the grid. Solar awnings, I'm not too familiar with, so I won't be able to speak too much on that today. So getting a bit of an idea of, is solar going to be cost effective for our site? So the cost to install solar varies so much. An installed cost for solar of around about 1.4 to 1.8K per kilowatt is reasonable. If you're in a house with a simple installation, we could see that down to close to $1,000 per kilowatt. Or if we're in a more complex apartment complex, that could well be above $2,000 per kilowatt installed. But around 1.4 to 1.8 $1,000 per kilowatt installed is a rough ballpark figure. 1 kilowatt of solar panels generates around about 1,350 kilowatt hours per year, maybe a little bit less if it's east or west facing and a lot less if it's south facing. However, it's important to note that not everything your solar panel generates is a saving. Only what it generates and what you use, that's the saving. If you're generating a lot, exporting a lot back to the grid, well, you're not saving, that's something different. And the payback on solar is often about 4 to 8 years, but it really does vary quite a bit. To run through a simplified cost-benefit analysis for the site we've been talking about. So we saw their daytime demand for electricity usage was around about 6 kilowatts. That's how much they use during the day. We know that their roof can accommodate up to 30 kilowatts, but we know, well, we don't need to install a system that big. We think a solar array around about 10 kilowatts will be about the right size for us. The installed cost, we know a rough ballpark figure. We can estimate it's going to be about $16,000, about $1,600 per kilowatt installed. We can get their daytime rate from their bills, and we can work out the electricity savings based on a 10 kilowatt system generating so much per year. We can work out the cost savings and work out the payback. So for this site, a simplified cost benefit analysis shows a payback's about 4.6 years, which is fantastic. So this site was really motivated to go ahead with solar. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm just going to leave it here, and it's something you can maybe look back through later if you want to do some of this cost benefit analysis for yourself and have a bit of an understanding of how we do that as a consultant. Once we have a cost benefit analysis, we need to go out and get some solar quotes. Now, getting quotes for an apartment buildings is tricky. There's lots of solar installers who install for houses and lots of solar installers who install on large commercial projects. Apartment buildings are tricky. They're sort of halfway between a house and a commercial site. Often the size of the solar system we're talking about is quite small, but the complexity is a lot higher. So if you're looking at solar suppliers, we really want people with experience working in strata who understand the challenges of apartment buildings and are willing to say, hey, we know what the opportunities and the issues are, but we're going to go ahead with it anyway. If we can get people with a good reputation, so important, your installer should or has to be CEC accredited. That's very important. They can't generate the rebate if they're not CEC accredited. When we go and ask for quotes, just going to have a drink. When we go to solar supply and ask for quotes, we want to give them some information to help them along the way. We want to show them recent electricity bills. If we can, let's download and give us this interval data. We want to have a think about the specific issues at our site, like our roof condition, roof access, electricity infrastructure, and make them aware of this from the get-go. So when they give us a quote, we want to say, hey, but have you considered the roof? Have you gone down to our main switch room and thought about how you're going to connect to our site? Really, really important. We can go to them and say, hey, we're thinking about a 10 kilowatt solar system, or they can come and recommend something for you. We want to give them site contacts. So how can they get access to your site? How are they going to get keys to access your main switch room? Are they going to meet a building manager? Are you going to be there? Someone from the executive committee going to be there? Is there a lockbox with the code? And give them a project timeframe too. So if you have a meeting coming up, say in a month, and you want some quotes before then, let them know. So hopefully they can give this information to you so you're well prepared to take it into that meeting. Now, comparing quotes is something that can be really tricky. Each solar supplier has their own format. You may get a quote which is going to be a 1-page. You may get a quote which is going to be 3 different PDFs with multiple pages full of pretty figures and pictures and things. So it can be really hard to compare. So what we really need to do is get these quotes from different suppliers and just extract the key information to compare for a like-for-like comparison. And understanding what's not included in their quote can be often more important than what is included. Has one solar installer looked at our roof and considered that, looked at our main switchboard and included that in the cost, and the other one hasn't? If one's cheaper, maybe it's cheaper because they haven't considered all the things they need to do at your site. So here is our solar quote checklist. This is something we've developed with our clients and with councils and through experience working forward. So these are all the different things we want to go through our quote and pick out this information. So size of the system, the cost of the system. Cost is also not the most important factor. Sometimes quality and reputation is more important than cost, as with lots of things. The warranties, the mounting type, have they specified whether it's going to be anchored or ballasted, or whether it's going to be membrane piercing? Is it going to be flat or tilt mounted? These are the things we need to look for. Do they have experience working in strata? What's their reputation? You know, what's included? Are they talking about organising Ausgrid approvals if necessary? Access to roof? Is a crane included if needed? And are they including some monitoring system as well? Will there be access to an online website where you can go on and look at the performance of your solar system? If so, is that free for the life of the system, or is there an annual subscription fee for that as well? And do they include some maintenance as well? Warranties. Lots of quotes. We'll talk about lots of different warranties. There's a few key warranties we need to be aware of. When we look at solar panels, the main one is a solar panel product warranty. So this is all about the quality of this product. The warranty here can range from 10 to 25 years. Obviously 25 years is best practice and you'll pay a premium for that. 10 years is at the lower end and you'll get a much cheaper panel. This is the main warranty we look for in the solar panels. There's also something called a solar panel performance warranty. This is not, we're not as concerned about this. This is all about the performance of the panel over a period of time. So that the performance and the efficiency will decrease slowly over time. That's not as important as making sure that this panel will last for 25 years compared to 10 years. So the main one is the solar panel product warranty. The inverter warranty is really important. So that can range from 5 to 12 years. Really, we recommend 10 years. We really don't like dealing with any inverter warranty less than 10 years. The inverter is a complex bit of equipment. It's expensive, and we want something which you know is going to last. The workmanship. So an installer has to offer a 5-year workmanship warranty if they're CEC accredited. So if they do anything, they need to come back and fix any mistakes they make. Some installers can offer a warranty up to 10 years. And again, that's great, but you'll pay a premium for that as well. But for a lot of sites, it's worthwhile. Government incentives. Yes, there is one government incentive to reduce the cost of installing solar. Excuse me. If we install a solar system less than 100 kilowatts, which is going to be most of us, basically, unless you're a really, really large business, then we get this small scale technology certificate. It's from the federal government, and it gives us around about $500 per kilowatt installed. And this will already be included in the quote from your solar supplier. So your quote should show you the total cost, show you this SDC rebate, and then show you the net cost that's going to be payable. Excuse me. So yes, there is a rebate, and yes, this is something that's already included from our solar installers when they give us our quote. Now, how do we compare the different panels and inverters? There's so much out there, so many different brands. There's one website which I refer to, which I think is pretty good, called solarquotes.com.au. The link is there. They have their own way of ranking the different panels. When we get our quotes in, the real key is to look at what is the warranty, what is that solar panel product warranty, what is the inverter warranty, and that's the first port of call. But there are these other websites we can use to help us get a feel for which are the more high-end premium products and which are the lower-end products as well. So this website's a good resource. This website has lots of information. You can get these tables comparing all the different specifics of the different panels. So if you really want to get into the technical details, there are really good comparison websites. Now it's worthwhile just talking about inverters and what is an inverter. So the inverter converts the DC electricity generated by the solar panels into the AC electricity that our houses and apartments can use. Now the traditional inverter is a string inverter. This is one box that sits on the wall. All the solar panels are connected in a string or a line. It's a very robust, simple solution. However, if there's one issue with the solar panel, it can affect the performance of the entire array because they're all in this one series connection. It's simple, it's less expensive, but it's not ideal in some situations where we may find the output of different panels will vary. So if we have a roof with shading, which is going to affect the panels at different times, we may want to use micro inverters. And this is where every solar panel has its own little micro inverter on the back. And if one panel's underperforming, it's got some shade, it's not going to affect the other panels in the system. So microinverters are really good for some solutions when there may be shading occurring. And the solar edge inverter is somewhere in between the two. It's a boxed inverter on the wall, but there's these optimizers connected to each panel, and it's halfway between a traditional string inverter and a microinverter. So these are different things to think about when we install solar on our buildings. Batteries. So there's a question about batteries before. So batteries are really great when we have an off-grid application. If we have a house in the country and it's going to cost $100,000 to connect to the local electricity wires, then let's go solar and let's get really good batteries and let's be self-sufficient. When we're in the city, we have a connection to the grid. Batteries are still not cost effective, and there's extra complexities in terms of using batteries in an apartment building due to fire and safety regulations. Where are these batteries going to be stored? How is that going to be managed? All the analysis we've done for all our clients has shown that batteries can really blow out the cost benefits from being, say, maybe 5 years payback on investment to, say, maybe 12 years or more payback on investment. So batteries are still quite expensive. They're a great technology and they're emerging, but then if you want to invest in batteries, go for it. But if you want to spend your money as wisely as possible to get the best sustainable outcome, then batteries at the moment, in my advice, is not the way to go about it. Batteries only approaching cost effective. If you can fully charge and discharge this battery every day, that means you're making the most of it. If you've got a battery that's only being used some of the days, then that battery is sitting idle a lot of the time. You're not getting the most out of it. To use the most of your battery means you need a really big solar system to guarantee you can totally charge and discharge this battery each day. If you've got this really big solar system, well, we're probably overcapitalized and got a solar system way bigger than what we need. So rather than install a really big solar system and go, well, we've got too much electricity, we need to put some batteries, it's much better to say, well, let's install a solar system that's right for our building. Let's install solar just to meet our daytime demand. If a little bit goes back to the grid, that's no big deal. So that's the place where we need to be. If we have an apartment building and it's 20 stories, we may have a pump down in the basement which maintains water pressure throughout the building. So it's a cold water booster pump pumping water throughout the building. If we need a 2 kilowatt pump to do that job, we're not going to buy a 4 kilowatt pump to do that job. We want the solar system to meet what our site needs. We don't want to over-invest in a really large array and then over-invest in batteries. That's not quite the idea at the moment. A question here, can you retrofit a battery at a later time when costs go down? Look, if you have a large solar system if you've got a solar system, you find you're exporting a lot back to the grid, yes, you can install batteries to grab some of that. So I wouldn't advise doing it from the get-go, but if we do have a really big solar system and maybe our electricity usage has gone down and we find we have a high export ratio, yes, you can go back and put a battery on to try to capture some of that. So it's not the most cost-effective solution, but if you find you're in that situation, then yes, you can do that. Look, it's almost 12 o'clock, so I'm going to finish up soon so we have some time for questions. Just quickly at the end, so once we've gone all through the steps of understanding the issues, doing a cost-benefit analysis, getting the quotes, analyzing those quotes, getting your final quote, the last thing we need to do is present a business case. Excuse me, I'm not used to talking for quite as long as this. We need to present a business case to our executive committee. We need to show them things such as the payback. We need to show them, yes, we have considered and conducted a meaningful cost-benefit analysis, which is reasonably accurate. Yes, we know that once this system is paid for itself, it will be delivering free, clean energy for the life of the system a very, very long time. This is a long-term investment, and the product has a low maintenance to it as well. We want to show the executive committee we have considered the warranties and looked at good quality products. We're trying to convince an executive committee to spend money on this, so we need to present all this to them. We want to show that we've got a reputable installer who has experience in Strata. We want to demonstrate that, yes, we understand the issues at our site and we've addressed those through the quotes. And to be aware of that there are a growing number of buildings and apartment buildings who are installing solar. So while this is still a relatively new field, it's been done and proven in so many cases. So when we can overcome the issues at our site and we can get good quotes and payback looks good, solar is a fantastic thing to do. And there's a question here. Very last slide, almost at the end. Just say we're in an apartment building, we find out for some reason we can't install solar. We can still power our common areas and our apartments with clean, green, renewable energy by buying green power. Now, green power is generated from a new renewable energy source. This is not from some old hydro scheme which has been around for 50 years. It's driving new investment in renewable energy. And we can supply our apartments or common areas with electricity from a wind farm just by paying a little bit more in our bills. So for some sites, if we really can't install solar for our apartment building, or we're renting, or we can't connect to our apartment, there are opportunities, and we can buy clean, green, renewable energy in another way without installing solar. And lastly, here's just a case study of a site with 129 apartments who got massive savings. But look, I'm going to stop now and leave a little bit of time for questions at the end.
Good, Gareth. I'll give you a quick rest on the voice there. That's quite a lot of information. Thank you very much, Hugh. Please take a second to get some water. I want to pop a couple of links as well in the chat that have been brought up today. So I'm just going to pop the link to the sunspot tool in there, which Gareth has brought up. Like I said, that's a great place to double check. Just first off, if your apartment is suitable. I just threw the link in there for Energy Smart Strata. Obviously, Gareth is from Energy Smart Strata, where the presentation has come from today. And I'll just pop the link in as well for the Allume system. We do have a couple more questions, so we might run a little bit over time, but we understand if you do have to leave right on 12 o'clock. Thank you, everyone who's joined in. We might spend a couple more minutes and wrap up with some more questions. Gareth, there's a question here from Paul. We have a question about, is the presentation available? Yes, this is going to be recorded, so you can rewatch it. There's a lot of amazing resources in there, such as I think that solar quote checklist particularly stood out as something that's going to be pretty valuable if you're starting in this space. So it will be sent out to everyone who is registered. We also have a question here about how easy is it to add panels if we have underestimated initially?
Yeah, so on that, when we install, say, a 10 kilowatt solar system, they'll often say, here's a 10 kilowatt inverter to go with it. What we often don't know is a 10 kilowatt inverter can actually handle a bit more than 10 kilowatts of solar panels. So often there's a little bit of capacity in our inverter that we can add extra panels without having to increase and replace our inverter. So the limit is the capacity of the inverter to handle the electricity from those solar panels. And often there's a little bit of headroom there.
Unreal. And then we have another question here from Tara about what is the best time to engage Strata, pre or post quotes. I think that's a really good point there, just around, there's a lot of technical aspects of installing solar apartments, but there's also a lot of, understanding Strata committees and working with others. So when do you get everyone on board? What's the kind of process that you do in Strata committees?
Yeah, so my experience is often we get the sites engaged and the different apartments engaged very early on. So apartments want to know about either my neighbors also interested in solar and get a feel for what is, what's the feeling in the site? How motivated are the people to look at solar? And is it something we want to go ahead with? And do people want solar for their apartments? So I'd say getting Strata involved really early on and just gauging what that feeling is at the site. Okay,
great. We have a question here from Alison. It's more about if you are a single person working full-time, so there's low energy use, perhaps solar investing. Alison, I'll just mention we ran a more of a generic introduction to rooftop solar and batteries. We also did that was on Friday. We also did an energy saving at home on Saturday. So those kind of recordings will cover off some information that's quite general about solar and how it all works. Gareth, do you have any comments on that one there about if you're not home during the day and how suitable solar is?
Yeah, look, I just feel it varies so much. I think a lot of us are working from home at the moment, and that could just be a couple of LED lights on a laptop, or it could be a lot more equipment. And there are opportunities for us to use our washing machines and different things during the day as well. So I guess if we can look at our interval data and work out how much we use during the day, we think about whether we can change our habits to increase our usage during the day as well. So it just varies so much. I think it's really about looking at your bills and your data and looking, I think it's more about understanding it's case by case rather than a general rule that solar is or isn't right for apartments.
Definitely, yeah. Those timers on dishwashers and those kind of things definitely allow you to make the most of your daytime energy use. We also have a comment sent here from Jonathan around, Jonathan already has a battery and is now actually in a virtual power plant, so that's pretty exciting, which he believes is better than relying on the feed-in tariff, but he still finds it not cost effective. So thank you for that comment, Jonathan.
Very interesting. Wow, yep.
Yeah, that's very advanced stuff there. Um, we also have another question here from Jonathan. Is you will be charging your electric vehicle, bike, or car? Was that a question, Jonathan, or a comment? I'll come back to
I,
that one.
I guess it's saying that yes, if we have solar during the day, it's how we use electricity. If we have some electric equipment we can charge, then we can use that solar. So yeah, I guess solar does require some habit changes when we look at for our residential purposes.
Sure, yeah, it's kind of preparing us for our all electric homes life, you know, as we're transitioning everything to being all electric, and then allows us to power it off renewable energy through things like green power and rooftop solar. So, we can match it with our changes. I might, just before I wrap up, I might just jump back to some of the stuff you mentioned at the beginning. You talked about, um, you know, energy efficiency being kind of the first thing to make sure you tick off so that you don't install a huge array and then halve your energy from energy efficiency. Do you have one or two things that people could be looking for around their apartment buildings when it comes to energy efficiency? It's quite a broad term. Should they be, is it kind of lighting or pumps? What should they be considering?
Yeah, so the big one in the apartment building is lighting. So lighting in fire stairs is a big one, often running 24/7 in car parks. Lighting in common areas as well, in corridors. So the LED upgrade, looking at LED motion sensor controlled lighting in these large common areas is super important. Looking at pool equipment, if you have a pool there, looking at ventilation in car parks. So car park ventilation is a really big one as well. Often we have these really large fans which are running on a time clock, and there's ways to optimize that. So I think lighting, LED lighting, motion sensor controlled, car park ventilation are two really big areas to get stuck into straight away.
Great. Thank you very much. We have a thank you sent in from Mimi for a very informative presentation outlining all the steps. Maybe just one more question to finish up on. Again, something which you might have addressed, but there might be some people here who are really starting out in this space and just learning. Do you want to kind of hint at what is step one? I guess it kind of like what you're saying. Step one isn't to call the solar installer. What would you kind of recommend for someone who's really at the beginning of their solar journey?
Yeah, so I'd say step one, the first thing I do after today is go to that Sunspot tool, APVI Solar, and I just type in my address and I look at the roof space and I just highlight on the website what is the roof area and go, oh cool, it looks like we can fit in 5 or 10 kilowatts of solar. This is how much it would generate. Once I've looked at that, I'd have a bit of a walk around my building and have a think about the roof and look at maybe try to get to the main electrical switch room and have a look about, is everything really new and shiny, or are there maybe a few issues? And then I just talk to my neighbors and say, look, I'm interested in solar. Is this something that you're interested in too? So yeah, I'd say they're the 3 main steps I'll get stuck into. And after that, you can start going through those steps of contacting solar installers.
Great. So a bit of homework for everyone here today. One more novelty question, I'd love to hear the answer. Gareth, have you ever installed panels anywhere other than on the roof?
No, it's always been rooftop. I guess yeah.
Okay, we'll say watch this space maybe for the
We'll see. Yeah.
the solar windows that are coming and the solar tiles and etc. So
Yeah.
watch this space, it's coming. Thank you everyone who's joined in for today. That was some amazing content. It will be recorded. We'll send out a copy to everyone. Please do tune in for some of our other events. We have, like I said, Dr. Carl coming up. And thank you very much, Gareth. That was some unreal information.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.